This week we dive into the final plague, this devastating death of the firstborn. And actually, I would even encourage you to pause your video and read chapters 11, 12, and 13. It's a long sequence describing this whole event. We're going to focus in at the heart of chapter 12, where God is actually describing the significance of this moment for future generations. But the whole chapter is obviously in mind. So maybe stop and read that and then go dive into chapter 12 with us in a little bit. Exodus 12, 1 through 13. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month will be the first month. It will be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole Israelite community, on the 10th day of this month, they must take a lamb for each household, a lamb per house. If a household is too small for a lamb, it should share one with a neighbor nearby. You should divide the lamb in proportion to the number of people who will be eating it. Your lamb should be a flawless year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You should keep close watch over it until the 14th day of this month. At twilight on that day, the whole assembled Israelite community should slaughter their lambs. They should take some of the blood and smear it on the 2 doorposts and on the beam over the door of the house in which they are eating. That same night they should eat the meat roasted over the fire. They should eat it along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Don't eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted over the fire with its head, legs, and internal organs. Don't let any of it remain until morning, and burn any of it left over in the morning. This is how you should eat it. You should be dressed with your sandals on your feet and your walking stick in your hand. You should eat the meal in a hurry. It is the Passover of the Lord. I'll pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I'll strike down every oldest child in the land of Egypt, both humans and animals. I'll impose judgments on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. This blood will be your sign on the houses where you live. Whenever I see the blood, I'll pass over you. No plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." So this sequence is in the middle. It's an interesting moment where the narrative is broken up by God describing to future generations the ritual that they're going to do year after year after year. But the story itself, we're not digging into it this time, but it spans much longer. The actual story, this 10th, final, and most devastating plague, where Moses tells Pharaoh, "I'm going to kill all the firstborn of your land." And any of you, there's actually a moment of mercy here as well, where even the Egyptians could have joined in this new festival. But interesting that God kind of breaks up the narrative and sets the liturgy, the ritual for future generations. He says this is actually now the first month of the year. This act of redemption is this defining moment for Israel. So much so that their whole calendar from here on out will be redefined around this act of redemption. It's almost like their birthday as a nation. They were a nation before, they were living before, but something about this moment resets the calendar. It's a defining moment. They are now becoming God's people. And so they are to kill a lamb. There's clearly some great connections here about atonement and being covered by the blood. God's destroying angel is about to sweep through the land of Egypt. But as you take it, you kill this lamb, you smear the doorposts and the beam of your house, and the Lord passes over. Right? This Passover lamb is this symbol. It's scary, it's dark, and yet the people are being rescued out of this darkness, out of this looming death because of the blood of this innocent lamb. So they eat it in haste because this is not just a meal, it's the first meal of their redemption. As soon as this happens, they're going to flee from Egypt, and so they're dressed, they got their walking stick on, they're eating it in a hurry because the Lord's about to pass over, and then they're going to get out of Egypt. So God says, I'll pass through the land of Egypt that night. I'll strike down every oldest child, both human and animals. I'll impose judgments on all the gods of Egypt. This again, we stopped in this section here because I think it helps just highlight a reason why God is doing this in the first place. This is one scene, the Exodus scene of God's judgment on Egypt sometimes gets a bad rap. It's unsettling for us. It's hard for us to see God dealing out such death and judgment, 10 plagues. But here, he actually gives the reason. It's both, there's a human element. Egypt and its king is oppressing the Israelites, and God is rescuing these slaves who have been crying out. But there's also this higher order, this spiritual thing going on, where Egypt has a bunch of all these false gods. And actually, you can go back and trace every one of the 10 plagues corresponds with one of the main gods of Egypt. And so what God has been doing throughout these plagues is actually saying, you think you have a God who controls the light and the day? Well, I'm more powerful, and he brings the plague of darkness. You think you have a God who controls the crops? I'm more powerful, and he can destroy the crops. You think you have a God of the Nile? Well, I can turn the Nile into blood. Over and over and over again, there's a direct correlation between and the final God was Pharaoh himself, who was deified. And so Pharaoh himself, his own son, who's supposed to take over after him, is being killed because of this. So God is dealing out judgment, but he's also giving them a sign. The blood is the sign that God has passed over. You deserve death, but God has passed over you because someone else died in your place. This, probably more than any of the other plagues, as Christians, points us to Jesus himself. I heard a Christian, a Messianic rabbi once describe, if you just actually act out the act of putting the blood on the doorposts, well, it's the lintels and the frame, right? The side and the top. It actually, with your hand, it starts to make a cross. Somehow, in God's providence, this first act, thousands and thousands of years ago, what they were doing was essentially making the sign of the cross over their door. And God was about to pass over them. So what's significant about God kind of stopping the narrative to describe for future generations what they're going to do to continue to remember this? This is a defining moment for Israel's future. This is where they really become a nation. They are now called out, they're rescued, they're redeemed through this Passover lamb, the shedding of the blood, the covering of the blood on the doorposts, making potentially the sign of the cross, is the thing that says this now redefines your calendar, your identity. Moving forward, this is where you begin. This is kind of like the birthday of this nation.